Hi everyone, you're listening to Untraditional Paths, a podcast where I talk to successful people across industries about the unexpected ways they reach their own success. My name is Jacqueline and I'm so excited to start sharing these stories with you. Today I have the honor of speaking with Shahla Karimi, a creative genius and an entrepreneur. Shahla, you're so young and you've already worked with designers like DVF and Alexander Wang. You served as the head merchandiser for President Obama's second campaign, and now you have your own jewelry line that celebrities like Carrie Underwood have worn on the red carpet. Thanks so much for being on our show today, Shahla.
Hey, Jackie. I'm not that young, but thanks so much for having me.
So the first question I have for you, Shahla, is what was it like growing up as Shahla? I know you grew up in Kentucky and then you came to New York and started your career and sort of took off from there. What was it like growing up in Kentucky and how did you find your way to New York and to the fashion industry? I'd really love to hear about your experiences up until now.
I've definitely never been asked what it's like growing up, Shahla, so I like this question. I grew up in a small town in Kentucky right outside of Louisville, and there wasn't a lot as far as fashion, but I mean, when I was little, my dad is just to preface this, my dad is from Tehran, Iran, and so when I was little, I was always adorned in gold bracelets, and my ears were pierced at 2 years old. It was kind of a cultural thing. So I've always been around jewelry and always had fine jewelry since an early age. But growing up, I mean, I was a tomboy. I went to the creek every day. I had a turtle farm. When I was 12, I actually started having my mom take me to Louisville, and I worked as a freeze model, which is someone who stands in a store window like a mannequin, which sounds super ridiculous, and it looked ridiculous. My cousin and I used to do that, so that's how I started working.
Oh wow!
I guess in fashion. It was at the mall. It was really embarrassing, and I'm glad that like iPhones didn't exist then, and no one has documentation of us because we would freeze, and then every 5 minutes we had to move to a new position. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I begged them to hire me. I ended up being the youngest hire at this retail store because I got lucky one day with a sale. That was sort of how I started working in retail, and I worked in retail until I left for New York. So through college, I worked in retail. I also worked in a restaurant. And then when I was 22, after I graduated, my mom dropped my friend Tracy and I off in the middle of Times Square with laundry baskets, and she said, "Call me when you're ready to come home."
That's really funny. So were you always interested in fashion? Was it that initial experience that sparked your interest, or is there another twist to the story? How did you get involved?
So I always liked it, but I never even, I mean, I guess also growing up in Kentucky, you don't ever even think about that that's what you're going to do. And things aren't that, back then, things weren't accessible. Now they are. I always said I wanted to be an artist or a designer, but my parents, or my dad, like I said, is Iranian, and he wanted me to be a doctor, lawyer, or engineer. Those were my choices. So in college, I majored in psychology, and when I was going to New York, I told him, I'm going to take a year off, and then I'm going to go back to NYU and get my PhD, become a clinical psychologist. So that didn't happen, because as soon as I got to New York, I got a job at a record label. It kind of snowballed from there, yeah.
So what was it like arriving in New York with all the noise and lights? How did you find your way? Had you ever been in New York? Were you overwhelmed? Tell me a little bit about what it was like transitioning from Kentucky to New York City.
It was my second time in New York. The only time I had been before, I was 19, and I was actually staying outside of New York. My girlfriend and I somehow talked this random person at a Dave & Buster's into taking us into the city, where we got stuck because we couldn't afford a cab to get back to the city. So we had to wait for this police officer to get off duty, and at 7 a.m. took us back to West Nyack where we were staying. So it was the second time in the city, but it was the first time that I'd ever actually, I was supposed to be there and had a place to stay, which was on someone's couch. I mean, I loved it. It never really overwhelmed me. I think I was always a little bit underwhelmed in Kentucky. But Louisville is a big city. I mean, there's 2 million people in it, but it's just not the same. There aren't the sky rises, the big buildings, the hustle and bustle. So I loved it. To me, it fulfilled something that I think I had been missing, and I would think I was a little bit almost depressed through college. I think I just needed the extra stimulation.
So what was your job like at the record label? What did you do, and how did you end up getting into fashion from there?
I think it was actually kind of fashion that got me a job at the record label, because funny enough, I went to a headhunter. This was my, I think second day in New York. And I was like, oh, this is how you get a job. My first job out of college. You go to a headhunter. And I was wearing a leather jacket because I didn't know that I was supposed to go on interviews after that. Dress for an interview. What do you want to do? And I was like, I don't know, something in entertainment, something exciting. I was open for anything. I was like, I just want to try new things. I'm supposed to go back to school in a year, so I just want to have fun. He's like, well, you're in a leather jacket, so the only place I can send you is to this record label. And he sends me to Sanctuary Records, which at the time used to also be a big management company, and they used to manage Destiny's Child and Fat Joe and Khalees and Morrissey. Yeah, it was a very cool building, too. It was in Chelsea Market. So he sends me on the interview in my leather jacket 30 minutes after meeting with him, and they hire me on the spot. So, it was for answering phones. So it wasn't a huge position. So I started, I think 2 days later, I started at this record label. So I think that my leather jacket got me the job.
That's a cool story.
So it was awesome. I had never, talk about perks for a first job. And this was back in the day. I'm saying back in the day, 13 years ago, but record labels were still sort of thriving. It was before the digital evolution, and even as someone who answered phones, I got all kinds of free CDs and free swag. They were part of Rough Trade, which is a merchandising company. I would get 4 tickets to every show. It was crazy. Wow. You can't even it's hard to even get 1 ticket now if you work at a label. Wow. Let alone for the receptionist / mail person. I kind of got to see, working up front and delivering mail to everybody, I kind of got to be friends with everyone that worked there and learn a little bit about every department. And what I was most interested in was Rough Trade, which was, like I said, it was merchandising at the time. So I was interested in that, and I was interested in art direction. Okay. So I worked there for a few months, and that's where I met Khalees, who was managed by Sanctuary, and I was her personal assistant, and Naz's, and that was a whirlwind. So that was an unplanned, I'm young, let me just follow what the most interesting thing is. So I was with them for 2 years, and I got to travel around the world. It was actually a really hard job and not a very rewarding job, but it definitely had its perks, and it had its fun moments, and I was able to do things that I will never ever be able to do again in my life. To me, it was insane. You always hear, you can become anything in New York. You can do anything in New York.
Wow.
So there was this 6-month period when I had moved to New York that I grew up really fast. I probably grew up more, in that 6 months than I had in the 22 years before. And so after I was a personal assistant, and I had seen other parts of the music industry, from being in the studio with them to working on, sponsorships and other campaigns with brands, I decided to go back to school for design instead of going back to school for my PhD, which my dad was not happy about. So I went to NYU for graphic design, knowing that I wanted to do creative direction. So not necessarily that I wanted to be a graphic designer. I just wanted to be able to speak the language of design. So I went back to NYU while I was working at actually another record label. And I did a 2-year program there to get my professional certificate in design. It's random, all random. But so when I was working after design school, I was working at a label, and I segued into the merchandise department, where I worked for 3 years for Warner Music Group. And I did a very similar thing that I ended up being recruited for the campaign to do. So at the campaign, I was a director of merchandising, and I was responsible for making over 400 products throughout the cycle of the campaign and raising money. My primary goal was to raise money for the campaign, which we raised $40 million, which is still a record today. Wow. Super proud of it. And I think the way we did it is, I didn't think about the campaign merchandise as being they call it chum, just this free swag. I thought about it more holistically as a brand. And so I used only the best fabrics from American-made vendors. We partnered with over 50 American fashion designers, DVF and Alexander Wang and Tory Burch. That's where I really started to dip into fashion a little bit more, because I was actually, in contrast to working at the record label, I was actually able to like get a little bit more creative and to concept products more, where I didn't have to get them approved by an artist. I could actually just come up with an idea, produce it, release it, market it through the website, through email, through pop-ups. And so it became essentially the business model that I have today, the way that we were pushing this stuff out. Of course, it was on a grander scale, and I had a massive budget, which is what makes it kind of hard in my business now, that I'm used to working with these large budgets where they literally gave me $20 million and they said, turn it into 40.
Yeah.
So I like to think that if someone wanted to give me $20 million right now, I could double it. If anyone's listening, you want to give me money, please do.
So what was it like working on the campaign day to day? Was there a lot of camaraderie, and did you get a chance to meet President Obama?
I did. I got to meet both Obama, but it was briefly, like I got to shake his hand. And Michelle, I got to spend about 5 minutes talking about American production and kind of the gaps in American production, so that was cool. As far as the atmosphere, it was the first time that I worked somewhere that it wasn't cutthroat and it wasn't competitive. Everyone actually had a singular goal. Yeah. And funny thing is, the first day, I had never worked in politics before or on a campaign before, and anyone who worked on a campaign definitely knew things that I didn't know coming in. So the first day they told us, we signed this sheet saying, and this is signing up for, 18 months of my life, and it says, you have no vacation days and you work Saturday and Sunday and there's no sick days. And I'm like signing this contract. I'm like, what am I getting into? They definitely didn't tell me this when I accepted the offer, and I'd already left my job at Warner. So that was definitely interesting, but it kind of set the stage for this, like, roll your sleeves up no matter how big or small you are on the campaign. Everyone is there for the same goal. And, people who were above me even would get down and dirty and sit there and sling merchandise with me. We all knocked on doors the last few weeks. So it was a very different atmosphere than like the big corporations that I had worked for. And I liked that. There was this unity with everybody. I couldn't keep doing it. And the only thing that kept me through, like, not having a day off was knowing that it's going to end on November 7th. And the same people who do it campaign after campaign, I think they get like that year and a half off before they have to start ramping for the next 4 year. And they forget because, they came after me to do the merchandise for Hillary. And I was like, no way. Although, and I had just started my business, so there was no way I would have time, but I did not forget.
Yeah, a lot of my friends who did campaign work after college say similar things, that they really loved the experience of being all together for a united cause, but that they would never do it again. So was the campaign the turning point for when you started getting more involved in apparel and jewelry? What happened next?
After the campaign, I guess fashion production became a good 75% of what I was doing. And to back it up a little bit, after design school, I actually did take technical classes in metalsmithing. Just on the side, it was something I was interested in. I'd always been interested in gold and accessories. And I even started selling some things on the side on Etsy. And it was more of a hobby than anything. But I always knew that that's ultimately what I wanted to do once I saved up enough money. So I couldn't dive right into it after the campaign. I still needed to stow some cash away, which what I thought I needed was really about a fifth of what I needed. But once I had that amount, I stopped freelancing and I said, I'm going to spend 2 or 3 months setting up this business, and then I can start freelancing again. So in 2013, I thought I had saved enough money to start my business. I was going to take off 2 or 3 months to set it up and then go back to freelancing. But after 2 or 3 months, I realized, I hadn't taken a day off. I'd been working every Saturday and Sunday. It was 16-hour days. And I was like, I don't know how I thought that I could just start this and then leave it. So I convinced my husband. I said, are you okay if I actually drag this out for 6 months and I'm not contributing to our income for 6 months? And he said, yeah, that's fine. Do what you need to do. So 6 months goes by. I still haven't taken a day off. Actually, the only day I took off was Christmas Day. And after 6 months, I'm like, I think I'm going to need 2 to 3 years before this starts to make any money, Tim. And by then, he's making a little bit more money at work. And I was like, do you mind if I take the next 2 to 3 years to do this? And Tim is a good sport. And, he kind of saw me going through these phases where I just wasn't happy doing what I was doing. And for the first time, it was definitely the happiest I ever was and the most stressed out I'd ever been, but it was so fulfilling. So Tim agreed to let me not contribute for 2 to 3 years. And the first year we had to live off of $7 a day each in New York City, wow, which means hot dogs and ramen noodles. And like we're in our 30s, early 30s doing this. And through the first year, and then, things got better. And it's still hard to do it. But the point is that I didn't even think about being an entrepreneur. I just wanted to have a label. And I didn't think about being a designer as being an entrepreneur. I'd never had a business class in my life. So I joke that the first year of being in business, I paid to go to Harvard Business School because that's how many mistakes I probably made and what I spent. But I learned a lot. So it's funny. If I could restart my business, it definitely would have taken less money.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, Justin and I always talk about how the first few months we were spending so much money on business, making so many mistakes in marketing and literally every area, that we learned so much so fast because we had our money that was at risk, and we had to learn or we weren't going to succeed. And it was like we were in business school for the price of what we spent, which is really crazy.
I know. And I think that could be a really good model for kids coming out of high school. Instead of spending $100,000 on their college, spend $100,000 to let them start a business. If that's what they're doing, if they're going into business, I think that they're going to learn way more from doing that than from going to college, unless they're going for a specific technical, doctor, lawyer.
Yeah, my brother is 16 actually, and he has a really successful YouTube account, which he uses a lot of business ideology and strategy for. And he told me he wants to major in business in college, and I told him, you definitely don't have to do that. You have a lot of business sense already. You already know a lot more than you think.
Wait, how does he do it? Google Ads or?
He has a YouTube channel called Eyeball, where he shares basketball history, predictions, information about different players, and kind of mixes it all together, makes these really interesting storylines. So he gets a lot of viewers, and the more viewers your video gets, the more Google, YouTube compensates you for getting people on your site to see all these ads.
God.
So he makes pretty good money doing that, and he's getting a lot of experience with marketing and ad placement and all these really interesting things, video editing too. So I think it's great.
So he's creative and entrepreneurial. Can he just skip college and get his MBA?
I know, it's funny. And my parents always complain about him saying Matt, why don't you have a job? And I'm like, what are you talking about? This is super cool. I wasn't doing that at 17.
When I was 17, I was just wanting to kiss boys.
Yeah, I worked at a pet shop, and I just wanted to save some money to go to Forever 21 with my friends on the weekends.
Yeah, I just wanted gas money and to sneak out of the house at 17. But I think that they also grew up in a totally different generation where they had access to things, what's going on in the real world a little bit more. At least that's what I like to tell myself.
That's funny. So getting back to your story, how did you come up with the concept for your line? A lot of it is inspired by memories, and there are a lot of really cool symbols that embody people's favorite sounds or favorite places. So can you tell me a little bit about why you started the brand with this concept in mind?
So when I was thinking of what I wanted as a brand, I wanted to create something that obviously hadn't been done because it's business. But everything I thought of tied back to some sort of memory and honoring personal journeys, because I also think that when you're buying a piece of jewelry, the jewelry industry is maybe unique in this way, that if you're spending money on fine jewelry, it's not because, it's pretty. Most of the time, it's because it means something, whether it's celebrating a promotion at work and being able to make this self-purchase. And you're always, every time you look at that ring, you're like, you know what, I'm self-made, or a birthday present. It always ties back to something when you're spending money on a personal piece like that. That's a nice to have, not a need. So I love this idea of having concept jewelry that still commercial though. It's not art jewelry. So I actually started with the Subway series. So it takes the routes from different subway lines and it curves them around your fingers and wrists. And it's really, I think they're really beautiful on their own. But then when you tell someone what it means, there's this romantic reveal. There's this hidden memory in everything. So the sound series, funny enough, when I was at Warner Music Group, is something that I pitched for like bands from Paramore to Led Zeppelin. I did mock-ups of the sound waves. No one ever bid on them. And of course it wasn't fine jewelry there. It was more like kind of merchandise for tours and websites. So it was something that I always knew I wanted to do because I was like, I don't understand. If we take this master recording, Led Zeppelin, and it's like this cool just shape that only you know what it means, doesn't that like tie you closer to the band? So that's something I always wanted to do. And when doing the sound series for my own brand, instead of using music, because that can be a little murky with like copyright, I actually took the master recordings from audio from iconic women and iconic movies like Breakfast at Tiffany's and The Wizard of Oz, and I picked phrases that link to the wearer. Like, I am a very stylish girl. That's a piece that she buys for herself. It's a very, eccentric piece. The Wizard of Oz, we did There's No Place Like Home, and to me that was a gift that you buy for, your daughter who's gone off to college or your long distance lover. So I always think about, as I'm designing things, I'm like, who would buy this and what occasion could they gift it for? Is it for themselves? Is it a good way to say something that they've been trying to say? I think it kind of like helps people express themselves and it does honor their personal journeys.
Cool. Yeah, I actually wanted to share with you a piece from your line that really resonates with my personal journey. I grew up in Staten Island, New York, and I always felt like the world was pretty small and limited until I went to high school in Manhattan, and then I went to college at Columbia in Manhattan. And in high school and college, my world just exploded. There were so many opportunities. I was in the center of the world. It was incredible. So I love your jewelry pieces that are part of the Subway series that track the line from South Ferry to Harlem, because that's actually a really, really meaningful mapping for me and my personal journey.
That's really cool. I'll have to get you one of those, Jackie.
I know, I have to get one.
You'll have to tell me what you are. Well, I'll get it for you.
No, that's okay.
You just tell me what size you are.
Thank you. That's so sweet. So I've been really excited about asking you what it's like when you see something that you've designed and created on the hand or ears or around the neck of a famous celebrity. What does that feel like? I mean, I know Carrie Underwood has worn your jewelry and a bunch of other really popular people. So tell me what that's like.
It's definitely really gratifying. And when I was joking about now my parents are proud of me for superficial reasons, that's what it is. Because it's like no matter what I did, it didn't like have the same impact as like I remember like the first time. I think Carrie Underwood was the first person to wear my jewelry, which obviously in Kentucky, huge. Even here, amazing. So I sent that to my mom. And then she's like telling all her friends, like, my daughter's a celebrity jewelry designer. I was like, what? Now you're proud of me because Carrie Underwood wore something? What about how hard I worked the last 10 years? So it's definitely very cool. And it never gets old. Like every time it happens, I'm like, that's amazing. I can't believe it. You feel like you almost know this person and you're very close to them. Like something that I made and I touched is now touching whoever. It's a very cool moment.
That is really cool. I love Carrie Underwood, so it's awesome. So I also wanted to ask you, as we start wrapping things up, have you ever felt like you faced any specific challenges or had to work harder, overcome something as a female entrepreneur? How has that impacted your journey?
For the most part, I feel like this industry compared to the previous industries I've worked in have actually been a lot more accepting of female entrepreneurship. And I found that working with other women, that we often band together to help each other. It's sort of like a sisterhood when you meet someone else who is in business for themselves that's a female. And I came from the music industry where it's really a boys' club, and I noticed a lot of glass ceilings that I don't notice now, or at least, maybe I'm optimistically oblivious to them. When I first started, though, and I don't know if this was a female thing or this was just breaking into the jewelry industry in general, but 47th Street is mostly older men, except for the newer jewelry designers coming in, which are both male and female. And when I was first sourcing a place to cast and polish and set, it was sort of a one-stop shop. I met this guy, and I think it's one of the only times that I cried during the first year, because I was just so frustrated when I left. I didn't cry in front of him. So I went to his office, and I've got everything done in CAD, which I had done myself, which I taught myself. I'm showing him all these designs, and I'm just trying to get some initial feedback on cost and production time. And, he said that he didn't want to work with me because I didn't know what I was doing, and he wasn't even going to hold his own kids' hands. And he asked me what stores I even want to be sold in. And I told him I wanted to be sold on Moda Operandi. And, he kind of laughed. And as I was leaving, I told him that I was going to put my first billboard outside of his window. So 3 years later, fast forward, and we're going to be launching on Moda the third week of October soon. And we've actually sourced a billboard that is outside of this guy's window. And we want to put dear, I'm not going to say his name, but dear so-and-so, you said I couldn't make it, and I did. So we're trying to figure out if we could do that for just one day.
That's amazing. You should definitely do that. That's awesome. And tell me how it goes. And also it might get you some good press. But so the last question is, what are you up to right now, and what lies ahead in the future? Do you have any short-term goals, any cool projects coming up? I'd love to hear what you're working on now.
Yeah, so, really excited to be launching on Moda. We just launched a capsule collection with Kenneth Cole that dropped in store 2 weeks ago, and we have a second collection coming, and we have a big press event around it that we're going to be doing at Kenneth Cole, so I'll keep you updated there. For the last 6 weeks of the year, we have a physical store in Grand Central, and then next year the big thing is trying to open the first guide shop, which will be a mix between a Bonobos and an Apple store, where you go in and you can see the product, and you can customize it, you can personalize it, see what it's going to look like, what's your destination going to look like, your sound wave, jewelry with different stones, and then it will ship from a centralized location in 3 to 5 days. And the idea is that jewelry is expensive, inventory is expensive, retail is changing, physical retail is really hard, but at the same time, if you can find a space that's small enough and it has a low overhead, it can be cheaper than acquiring customers through online advertising, which, as you know, is super expensive. So the idea is that we open several of them after the first proof of concept is successful and everything ships from a central location, and we don't have a jewelry store full of $1 million worth of jewelry. So it should be cost effective. But that's the dream for next year. That's the goal and my singular focus for next year.
Thank you so much, Shahla. It was such a pleasure to hear your story. And I encourage everyone who's listening to check out Shahla at shahlakarimi.com. That's ShahlaKarimi.com. And check out the information about her. She's awesome. And I can't wait to see what else you do in the future, Shahla. Thanks.